Charles Haughey admits getting Ben Dunn's money and to his fear of the consequences of disclosure. An 18-year-old Catholic woman is shot dead in County Antrim. And for the third time, Tues begins his libel action against independent newspapers. Good evening. Former Taoiseach Charles Haughey today spent just under 2 hours in the witness box at the Dunn's Payments Tribunal. He admitted receiving £1.3 million from Ben Dunn and accepted Mr Dunn's evidence that he handed him 3 drafts worth £210,000, although he said he had no recollection of the meeting. Mr Haughey also apologised for not cooperating with the tribunal, describing as unhelpful letters he wrote denying that he received the money. He said that he had been reluctant to face the consequences of disclosure.
Mr Haughey's evidence began with a prepared statement accepting that he had not cooperated with the tribunal. He said he regretted this, saying his recollection of events was confused since his departure from public life. Mr Haughey also said he had been concerned about the effect for him in the public mind of the revelation of the payments. He said the late Des Traynor took total control of his financial affairs from 1960 onwards, so that Mr Haughey would not be distracted from politics by financial concerns. He accepted that he should have involved himself more in these matters, but said that he never knew the details of the financial arrangements put in place on his behalf. He assumed Mr Traynor raised money through borrowings, but he accepted that he never signed guarantees for such borrowings. Much of the money in question was used for the upkeep of the Abbeyville estate, a considerable drain on his resources, but he denied that he had a lavish lifestyle. Mr Haughey admitted that Ben Dunn gave him £1.3 million and accepted the evidence that Mr Dunn handed him £210,000 at Concealy, although he had no recollection of that meeting. He said Margaret Heffernan was the first to mention the rumoured payments, and after he met her in July 1992, Des Traynor confirmed that Ben Dunn was the source of the money. He said he was disturbed as it was a serious matter, but agreed he did nothing to repay the money. At that stage he said the Dunn family was at odds and he didn't feel that he should take any overt steps. Under examination by counsel for the tribunal, Dennis McCullough, Mr Haughey said there was no ulterior motive behind the non-disclosure of the payments. While he was in office, he didn't know about them and therefore didn't feel under any obligation to Ben Dunn. Mr Haughey accepted the general principle that it was improper for people in politics to receive large sums from business people, but said there were circumstances under which it would be acceptable. If there were no ulterior motives, such payments would not be improper. Mr McCullough said that in a statement on July the 7th, Mr Haughey had tried to conceal the fact that he had known about the payment since 1993. Mr Haughey replied that he could only say that he was reluctant to face the inevitable consequences of disclosure. Mr McCullough suggested that he had hoped that the tribunal would not be able to find proof of the payments. Mr Haughey said he had always known at the back of his mind that disclosure was inevitable. He also said that he had always paid his taxes, but that he didn't ask Mr Traynor if there were tax implications arising from the Dunn payments, as he assumed that that had been taken care of.
This was day 17 of the Payments to Politicians Tribunal, the day that former Taoiseach Charles Haughey was to give his evidence. In the lead-up to this historic occasion, there were those who said Mr Haughey would never turn up at Dublin Castle. But turn up he did, just after 7:20 this morning, and without any photographers, camera crews or reporters there to record his arrival. The members of the public who'd queued up some since 2 o'clock in the morning were taken aback to see Mr Haughey arrive in a car driven by a member of his legal team at such an early hour, almost 3 hours before the proceedings were due to get underway.
We'd actually been speculating how was he going to get in and was he going to be brought in the back way and all the journalists and so on. And then suddenly he turned up and he looked very well. He was grey suit and looking reasonably composed. He was greeted by a number of the tribunal staff and shook hands and then just walked in. No ceremony at all. He was practically in before he realised he'd got here at all.
So Mr Haughey had outwitted the media by his early arrival. Inside he was briefed by his legal team in the offices which are known as Charlie's Rooms, ever since the time when he was Taoiseach and attending summit meetings here. Such was the media interest in the day's proceedings that special accreditation and seating was provided for the journalists. The unparalleled public interest also meant that 2 overflow rooms had to be opened, to provide an extra 600 seats where the unfolding drama could be watched on closed-circuit television. If Mr. Haughey's arrival surprised everyone, his departure was full of the drama of the glory days of the former Taoiseach. The ending of his evidence just after 2 hours took everyone by surprise. Outside in the castle yard, up to 1,000 people gathered to watch the former Taoiseach leave. Would he go by a side entrance or in the full glare of the media? Upstairs, Mr. Haughey and his team decided it should be a grand exit, and the grand exit it was. And just after 1 o'clock, he departed to cheers and boos, ending one of the most remarkable few hours in the recent history of Dublin Castle. As he was going, he refused calls from waiting reporters to answer questions. Former Taoiseach Charles Haughey was witness number 46 at the Duns Payments to Politicians Tribunal. In his evidence here this morning, Mr. Haughey said the reason he had misled this tribunal on a number of occasions was his reluctance to face up to the inevitable consequences of disclosure. And given all that's happened here this morning, it's now almost certain that Mr. Haughey will have to face another tribunal, probably bearing his own name, and face even more probing questions.
An 18-year-old Catholic woman who